The envelope arrived on a sunny Thursday morning, innocuous at first glance, yet it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The cream-colored card, embossed with gold lettering, was a formal invitation to the annual corporate gala. The irony hit me before I even opened it. The same group of colleagues who had mocked me for years, who whispered behind my back about my mediocre achievements, had sent me this invitation. But it wasn't really an invitation, it was a joke. I unfolded the card carefully, the crisp paper snapping slightly in my hands. "Alexander Taylor, you are cordially invited," it began, the usual ceremonial language of such events. Then the kicker: "Please join us for an evening of laughter, networking, and celebration of our top achievers." My stomach sank. It wasn't an honor. It was a setup. They wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel small in front of the very people I had worked alongside for years. I could almost hear their laughter echoing across the polished marble floors of the hotel ballroom they had chosen. For a long moment, I considered ignoring it entirely. I thought about tossing it in the trash and pretending it never arrived. After all, why give them the satisfaction? But as I stared at the elegant script, something inside me stirred. There was a fire I hadn't felt in years, a mixture of indignation, determination, and a quiet, unshakable confidence. If they wanted a joke, I would become the punchline they never expected. The months leading up to the gala became a quiet but intense preparation. I wasn't going to enter as the timid, underestimated woman they remembered. I wanted every detail to reflect not just who I had become, but what I had accomplished silently while they dismissed me. First came the dress, custom-made, perfectly tailored, elegant but understated. It wasn't flashy in a way that screamed wealth, but it radiated confidence, power, and presence. Every stitch, every cut, every seam had been chosen to convey subtle authority. Next, I focused on my arrival. They were expecting me to walk in timidly, perhaps with uncertainty, glancing around nervously, trying to blend into the background. That would never happen. I planned my entrance meticulously, timing, posture, and the energy I would project. I would arrive on my own terms, with a calm assurance that would immediately make them uncomfortable. Not arrogant, just undeniably composed. Then came the final step: preparation for conversation. I didn't just want to look the part, I needed to own the room intellectually and socially. I spent weeks reviewing recent company reports, industry news, and subtle trends I knew my colleagues would assume I didn't notice. I memorized names, achievements, and connections, creating a network map in my mind. By the time I stepped into the gala, I would know more about the company's successes and blind spots than anyone else in the room. The night of the event arrived, and I parked my car several blocks away, choosing to walk the last stretch to build anticipation and compose myself. The hotel lobby was glittering with chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the low hum of high-profile conversations. People were dressed to impress, but none of them anticipated the storm walking calmly toward them. As I entered the ballroom, conversations paused briefly. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but there was a shift, an almost imperceptible recognition that someone in the room carried authority and confidence without demanding attention. I caught the eyes of a few colleagues who had openly mocked me in the past. Their smiles faltered. Their whispers stopped. They were trying to read me, but they couldn't. I had changed in ways they hadn't anticipated, and for once, they couldn't predict the outcome. I approached the registration table with a calm smile. "Alexander Taylor," I said, my voice smooth, clear, and confident. The receptionist, taken slightly aback by my composure, handed me a sleek name tag. I pinned it to my dress and walked into the main hall. My presence was not ostentatious, but it was impossible to ignore. Heads turned, whispers started, and I allowed a subtle, knowing smile to play across my lips. They thought they were inviting a joke, but I was about to become the highlight of the evening. As I mingled, people who had once dismissed me tried to engage, offering polite compliments and tentative small talk. I answered graciously, but I wasn't here to charm them. I was here to observe, to navigate, and to claim my position in the room. Every laugh they offered felt forced, every compliment tinged with disbelief. They couldn't reconcile the woman standing before them with the one they had mocked. The surprise on their faces was delicious, but the real satisfaction would come later. Halfway through the evening, the event organizers began announcing award categories: Outstanding Achievement in Innovation, Rising Star in Leadership, Exceptional Contributions to Team Success. These were titles I had quietly earned over months, working behind the scenes while the so-called top performers basked in superficial praise. When my name was announced for multiple awards, the room collectively froze. Some clapped politely, but I could see the shock in their eyes. I stepped forward, accepted each award with poise, and delivered concise, intelligent remarks. In that moment, everything shifted. I wasn't just a participant, I was the standard. Every mocking glance from earlier had dissolved into recognition, some tinged with guilt, others with awe. The colleagues who had planned to ridicule me had unintentionally created the perfect stage for my triumph. Their assumption of my weakness had been the fuel for my rise. By the end of the night, I had transformed the narrative completely. People approached me, seeking advice, connections, and insight. The jokes, the whispers, the scorn all had evaporated under the weight of undeniable competence and confidence. I hadn't just survived the night, I had claimed it as my own. As I left the gala, the same fire that had sparked when I first opened that invitation burned brighter than ever. I had entered as the intended punchline, but I left as the guest of honor, having rewritten perceptions, shattered assumptions, and cemented my place not just in the room, but in the narrative of everyone who had doubted me. And in that quiet triumph, I realized, sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation, it's proving them wrong without ever raising your voice. The room had been mine all along, they had only failed to see it. After the gala, the adrenaline hadn't faded, it had only sharpened. I knew that one night of triumph wasn't enough. The people who had mocked me, dismissed me, and planned to make a spectacle out of me weren't going to change their perceptions overnight. If I wanted my victory to be lasting, it had to be strategic, subtle, and undeniable. I had to ensure that from that point forward, every interaction, every decision, and every opportunity reinforced that I was no longer the person they underestimated. I started by reflecting on everything that had led me to that moment. Years of being overlooked, being the target of backhanded comments, and being underestimated had given me an unspoken edge, patience. I had learned to move quietly, gather information, and build my resources without attracting attention. Every small win had been part of a plan that was only beginning to take shape in their minds now. I realized that the night at the gala was a preview, not the conclusion. The first step in my strategy was observation. I made it a point to know exactly who held influence in the company and the social circles that had treated me as insignificant. I didn't just memorize names, I studied their behaviors, motivations, and weaknesses. It wasn't about malice, it was about awareness. I needed to know the people who could support me, those who could challenge me, and those who would inevitably try to undermine me again. Next came reputation management. I had always worked hard, but most people saw only the surface of my contributions. It was time to highlight accomplishments in a way that couldn't be dismissed. I began sharing subtle updates on projects I had led, offering insights that only someone deeply involved would know, and letting others see my initiative without appearing boastful. Each post, each email, each presentation was calculated to build credibility. Slowly, I began to see the shift. People who had laughed at me were now starting to respect my intelligence, dedication, and foresight. Financial control was another essential element. I had quietly begun diversifying my income streams, investing in ventures that complemented my expertise, and ensuring that my economic position could no longer be questioned. The irony wasn't lost on me. The people who assumed I lacked resources now interacted with me in ways they wouldn't have if they knew the quiet power I wielded. Every investment, every deal, and every decision was part of a long game, one that would solidify my authority without unnecessary confrontation. One particularly powerful tactic was leveraging alliances. I sought out mentors, industry leaders, and colleagues who had proven themselves trustworthy. I cultivated genuine relationships with them, sharing knowledge and offering collaboration. Unlike those who had underestimated me, these individuals recognized talent and initiative. They became allies, quietly reinforcing my reputation while providing guidance and opportunities that expanded my influence far beyond what my detractors imagined. I also paid attention to timing. Every action I took was deliberate, chosen to maximize impact. I didn't rush into public displays of power. Instead, I allowed small victories to accumulate until the moment when the weight of my competence could no longer be ignored. Each successful project, each acknowledgement from external clients, and each subtle demonstration of skill became another brick in the foundation of a reputation that was unshakable. Office itself became my arena. I observed meetings with the patience of a strategist, listened for patterns in decision-making, and quietly identified gaps in leadership. I wasn't overtly challenging anyone. I was documenting evidence of my ability to solve problems, streamline processes, and enhance outcomes. The former mocking colleagues were still operating under the illusion that I was just background noise. Little did they know that the groundwork for the next phase of my rise was already laid. Outside the office, I carefully managed my personal presentation. Not in a flashy, superficial way, but in a manner that projected confidence, competence, and calm authority. I refined my communication, appearance, and presence so that every interaction, even casual encounters at industry events, reinforced the perception that I was no longer the person they could mock or dismiss. It was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but the impact was profound. The real turning point, however, came when I began creating opportunities that others had assumed were beyond my reach. I volunteered for high-stakes projects, accepted responsibilities that had previously been reserved for senior staff, and delivered results that were impossible to ignore. Each success was quietly documented, a testament to my capability and a reminder that the joke invitation had underestimated not just me, but the potential I had cultivated over years. One evening, I reflected on the contrast between my quiet preparation and their oblivious arrogance. They had mocked me at the gala, laughed behind closed doors, and assumed they could define my worth. Meanwhile, I had built networks, secured resources, and established credibility that they couldn't anticipate. The realization wasn't about revenge. It was about justice in its purest form. Competence, preparation, and patience had become my allies, and the impact would be undeniable when revealed. By the end of Chapter 2, I had completed the silent groundwork. My reputation was growing, alliances were forming, and my strategic advantage was clear. I was no longer just a participant in the office dynamics or industry circles. I was quietly positioning myself to become the undeniable authority. The people who had invited me as a joke had unknowingly created the perfect environment for my rise. And soon, they would realize that their assumptions about me had been catastrophically wrong. Months passed, and the transformation I had quietly engineered began to show in full view. My colleagues who had once dismissed me as irrelevant now noticed subtle changes in the office dynamic. I wasn't loud, I wasn't confrontational, but I was undeniably effective. Projects that had stagnated under senior leadership suddenly moved forward under my guidance. Deadlines were met, profits improved, and clients, who had once overlooked me, started requesting my input directly. It was the beginning of a shift I had long anticipated. I started taking the lead on high-profile projects, the kind that everyone secretly coveted but only the most assertive or well-connected could secure. At first, there were whispers of surprise. Alexandra leading that project, but I had already anticipated every challenge. Every presentation, every client meeting, every internal review was meticulously prepared. I didn't just deliver results, I exceeded expectations in ways that were visible, measurable, and undeniable. The more I succeeded, the more attention I drew. Senior staff began to notice, and while some were intrigued, others were visibly uncomfortable. Those who had mocked me were unsure how to react. Their laughter and scorn had become awkward silence. The irony was delicious. I had built my competence quietly, and now it demanded recognition on my terms. The office politics that had once worked against me were now irrelevant. My results spoke louder than words ever could. I also began strategically expanding my influence outside the office. I networked with industry professionals, attended conferences, and published insightful commentary under my name. Suddenly, my voice carried weight beyond the walls that had previously confined me. People who had once questioned my ability were now reaching out to collaborate, seek advice, and even mentor under my guidance. Every interaction was a reminder that the woman they had underestimated had quietly built authority and respect. While my rise was becoming visible, I also took care to protect my allies. Those who had supported me, even subtly, received opportunities and recognition they deserved. Loyalty and competence became intertwined in my approach. I wasn't just building my own influence, I was cultivating a network of talented, capable individuals who reinforced the new standard I was establishing. It was a quiet revolution, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore once it fully manifested. The moment that truly marked my rise came during a quarterly review. I had been asked to present results on a client initiative that had been struggling for months. The previous manager had failed repeatedly, earning criticism from the board. I approached the presentation with calm confidence. Every metric, every chart, and every solution was presented clearly and concisely. When I concluded, there was a moment of silence. Then applause. The room that had once dismissed me as inconsequential now acknowledged the truth. They could no longer ignore my capability. Even then, I didn't celebrate. This was only one milestone. The real victory lay ahead, in ensuring that those who had treated me as a joke understood the consequences of underestimating me. I meticulously documented every success, ensuring my impact was recorded. It wasn't arrogance, it was preparation. I knew the day would come when I would no longer need subtlety or quiet demonstrations. I would take full control, and the results would speak for themselves. Outside the office, I had also quietly invested in personal growth. Courses on leadership, finance, and strategic management became my second education. I read voraciously, learning from biographies of industry leaders, analyzing business models, and understanding human psychology. Every new skill, every new insight was a tool I could deploy when the time came to claim my ultimate victory. The people who had laughed at my simple approach had no idea that I was building something far greater than they could imagine. At home, I was deliberate in my focus. Late nights and early mornings became the norm, not out of obligation, but as a deliberate choice to outwork, outthink, and outmaneuver the skeptics. While they were busy gossiping, boasting, or competing for superficial recognition, I was silently assembling a reputation, a network, and a foundation that would be unshakable. Patience had become my ally, and each day was a small, deliberate step toward inevitable triumph. Then came the moment when opportunity and preparation collided. The CEO announced his sudden departure, leaving a leadership vacuum. Instantly, whispers circulated about who would fill the position. Those who had once ridiculed me assumed it would be someone more experienced or better connected. They didn't realize that experience and connections alone weren't enough. They underestimated the value of competence, preparation, and unwavering determination. I submitted my proposal quietly but confidently. It outlined strategic initiatives, operational improvements, and long-term growth plans. It wasn't boastful, it was factual, measured, and transformative. When my plan was presented to the board, the room fell silent. Every detail had been anticipated, every challenge addressed, and every opportunity optimized. The people who had doubted me were now forced to confront reality. I was the most qualified candidate. When I was named interim head of the division, the reactions were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and silent acknowledgement. Colleagues who had mocked my ambition now approached with tentative respect. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My success was evident, and that was far more powerful than words could ever be. I had arrived not as a punchline, but as the undeniable authority. By the end of Chapter 3, I had not only established my competence, but had also laid the groundwork for ultimate control. The people who had planned to humiliate me had, through their own ignorance, provided the perfect stage for my rise. My achievements were no longer quiet victories. They were visible, undeniable, and respected. I had become a force they could no longer ignore, and the final act of transformation was just ahead. The day I had been preparing for quietly over the past months finally arrived. I didn't announce it. I didn't send invitations or drop hints. The people who had once laughed at me, who had treated me as a joke, were about to learn that the joke had been on them all along. I walked into the office that morning with calm confidence, carrying only a small briefcase and a determination that had been years in the making. The first reaction was subtle: whispers, quick glances, and tense posture. Those who had dismissed me as inconsequential were now aware that something had shifted. I could see the unease ripple through the room as I called a meeting. It wasn't just a standard team meeting. It was the stage for the culmination of my silent strategy, my rise, and my ultimate victory. When everyone was seated, I began calmly, almost conversationally. "I'd like to start by discussing the direction of this division," I said. I presented updates, strategic insights, and operational improvements in a way that demonstrated not just competence but authority. The difference from my previous presentations was clear. This time, the room wasn't skeptical. They were attentive, silently acknowledging that the person they had underestimated was now in command. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I shifted the focus from strategy to structure. As part of the new leadership, we're making some organizational changes, I continued. These changes are designed to optimize efficiency, reward true merit, and remove barriers caused by complacency or outdated hierarchies. I let the words hang in the air, watching expressions shift from curiosity to apprehension. I started with the names of those who had actively undermined me or doubted my capabilities. Their faces paled as they realized that their positions were no longer guaranteed. I didn't revel in their discomfort, but I didn't hide it either. From today, I said, the company will operate under a new set of principles: competence, accountability, and respect. Those who cannot meet these standards will be reassigned or relieved of their duties. Eyes darted nervously around the room. Former skeptics, those who had mocked my ideas or attempted to sabotage my efforts, suddenly found themselves facing the consequences of underestimating me. I continued, calm but unwavering. This isn't personal. This is about building an organization that thrives because every individual contributes meaningfully. There's no place here for arrogance, dismissiveness, or underestimation. Then came the most important part, the reveal. You all know the story of how I was once invited as a joke, I said, letting my gaze sweep across the room. Silence fell. The very same people who thought I was inconsequential are now part of an organization that I help lead. And the difference isn't luck, it's preparation, dedication, and the refusal to let others define my worth. The room was tense. Former bullies shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, realizing the depth of my rise. I've worked quietly, built credibility, and earned the authority necessary to make real change, I continued. And today, that authority is being exercised fully. Positions are being reassigned based on merit, opportunities are being given to those who deserve them, and ineffective leadership is being removed. It was time for the final moment, the public acknowledgement of what I had accomplished. From this point forward, I said, voice steady, this division operates under new management principles. The culture changes today, and anyone who underestimated me should remember this. Competence always finds a way to prevail. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in every mind present. Then I distributed the organizational restructuring plan. The consequences were clear. Those who had treated me as a joke were reassigned or let go. Their power had been based on assumption, privilege, and oversight, and it crumbled under the reality of my preparation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very people who had tried to belittle me had facilitated the perfect conditions for my ascendancy. I then turned to the rest of the team, the ones who had quietly supported me, who had recognized talent and dedication when others ignored it. For those who have contributed with integrity, your efforts will be recognized. New leadership, new opportunities, and promotions are based solely on merit. This is your moment to excel. The expressions of relief and pride were unmistakable. The culture was shifting, and those who deserved recognition finally received it. But the ultimate satisfaction wasn't in reassigning or firing anyone. It was in the quiet acknowledgement that my critics could no longer dictate my path. Their laughter, their jokes, and their dismissive comments were powerless against the reality I had created. I had turned ridicule into a foundation for success, and every strategic move had been executed without them ever realizing the depth of my preparation. Later that week, the whispers had changed tone. Where once there had been mockery, there was now cautious respect. Invitations were extended not as a courtesy, but because colleagues and industry professionals recognized the authority I now wielded. I was no longer a background figure. I was the person everyone looked to for guidance, insight, and leadership. Reflecting on the journey, I realized the power of patience and preparation. Being underestimated had been my greatest advantage. While others flaunted privilege or assumed superiority, I had quietly built competence, credibility, and control. The lessons weren't just about strategy, they were about understanding human behavior, seizing opportunities, and never allowing someone else's perception to define your worth. In the end, the people who had once treated me as a stranger, a joke, or an outsider had learned the hard way. Judgment without knowledge is dangerous, arrogance is costly, and competence ultimately commands respect. My journey from ridicule to leadership wasn't just personal, it was transformative for everyone in my sphere. As I walked through the office that evening, the sun setting and casting a warm glow over the city skyline, I felt the culmination of years of strategy, patience, and effort. I wasn't just a survivor of mockery, I was a leader who had turned every slight, every joke, and every dismissal into a stepping stone toward undeniable authority. The lesson was clear: never underestimate someone quietly building their empire. And for those who had mocked me, they finally understood the truth. The joke had been on them all along.